I'm coming into this video having just witnessed the absolute masterclass that was the Baku Grand Prix. So, apologies if I seem absolutely hyped about the whole thing. Truth be told, I've been clenching my ass cheek since lap 20 or something, and I haven't been able to unclench since, so I'm in a bit of discomfort over here.
What the hell have you done to my car?
Yeah, all good, man. All good.
Well, in any case, quick reflection. Wow, what a fucking race, mate. I've got to say, having seen Lando be so out of position in quali, and Charles scoring yet another one of his pole positions here, I was getting quite depressed ahead of the race. I was absolutely sure that of all tracks, this is like the tightest and most difficult one to overtake on. Well, apart from Monaco, of course, but you can hardly call it a country, let alone a fucking racetrack. Might as well be racing around Vatican City. It's pretty much the same size. And just as wealthy. Nevertheless, this time the street track delivered. And it delivered big. Excuse me. Sorry. Jesus, how old am I? 15? And before, why we're always looking forward to races on street circuits was not because it produced great racing per se. Rather because it almost always ended in at least 2 safety cars per race. There are, after all, 2 horse drivers on the grid. This time, although Magnussen was still in after-school detention in Monza, we still ended up having a safety car in the Grand Prix. It seems to be just physically impossible for Perez to make it onto an F1 podium anymore. But the VSC came essentially on the last lap of the race, and didn't have that much to do with how exciting it was. There was racing happening all throughout the Grand Prix. The top spots were shuffling, with top 3 driving within 1 second for like 25 laps straight. The midfield was nice and spicy, with the 2 championship leaders thugging it out between each other, and Albon in a Williams. I don't know what the was happening, honestly. I didn't even know those things could go past the pit speed limiter.
Unexpected for us to be in that kind of awkward position where we were in the mix with the leaders. I didn't really know where my race was.
But honestly, this was an amazing race to witness, and I already can't wait for Singapore. But what is most important is that this was not just a one-time fluke. This wasn't because the typical race leader, by God's grace, was put out of position ahead of the race. Although that was kind of the case. This wasn't because it was all of a sudden torrential rain and a quarter of the grid ended up in the wall retiring. No, this was a typical race this season. Now, how come is this year so different, so amazing, so brutally entertaining compared to the ones before? And no, it's not just because Perez is finally in his rightful place in the driver standings. There's a bit more to it. I promise. Although, you should see the f***ing smile on my face right now, mate. The main reason why it is such a brilliant season so far is because we're in what I call a dominance shift. I've already detailed it a bit in a previous video, so I won't go too much into detail on the historics of this magical phenomenon. Just go watch that f***ing video, mate. It's actually pretty relevant considering that McLaren have now finally taken over the Constructors' League from Red Bull. God bless the F1 version of Rick and Morty. But what this means is essentially every time a span of dominance from a particular team finally comes to an end, and in our case the tyranny that we had to live through under the Dutch reign seems to be well and done with, thank fuck. What happens is typically a pretty short but fantastically entertaining transition period. A time when there is not a complete domination by one team or one driver in this case, and instead the reins are being handed over to the next team in line. That was what happened in 2021, which made for an amazing season finale, even though one of the sides thought the whole thing was stolen from them. At least for this one, there was no televised raid on the White House in the aftermath. Just a couple of very displeased rich folk. What is, however, absolutely fascinating about this year, making it better than 2021, and in my humble opinion, better than 2014 and even 2001. And I know I'll be absolutely pummeled in the comments for saying this, as usual. A guy can't have an opinion anymore without being crucified. Most of you weren't even born then, so shush. Either way, what makes this year so f***ing special is that it is not a clear transition from one team to another. It feels more like a f***ing free-for-all than anything. I mean, there were 7 Grand Prix winners this season. 7. That is 5 more than last year. And we have 1/3 of the races to go still. And this variability is exactly what makes the sport so much more fun. Honestly, who would have known you could go into a Grand Prix not knowing who would win it? The fact that this is a new thing for the sport makes it so much more f***ed up. Another important contributing factor to this whole liking F1 thing again, it feels weird, man. What has made a tremendous difference is that there's been a big switch in the typical strongman of the sport. Of course, the transition from one team to another is already great. In fact, it seems to be a once in a 3 years type of thing, so I'm not complaining. But what makes it so much better is that it's not just a juggling act between your typical top teams, like handing back the reins to Mercedes, or even a short dominance stint from Ferrari, which we are actually pretty used to seeing prop up every other year. Until, of course, they end up getting caught with some illegal mods again and are suddenly lapping slower than the Saubers. This time, though, it's McLaren. A team with a lot of history in the sport for sure, but if you look back at 2017, 2018, not even 10 years ago, they were eating arse at the back of the field. Hands down the worst team on the grid. I mean, it made Alonso quit the sport altogether, so it must have been really f***ing bad, mate. And this is what gives the sport a fresh perspective, especially with a bunch of fresh faces finally getting their time to shine. Crocodile Dundee Jr., Liam from One Direction, Timothy Chalamet, I mean, the list goes on and on. Even Woody from Toy Story has gotten a spotlight this year. And finally, I think that a lot of this chaos going on during the race is driven by the absolute fuckery that is happening behind the scenes. Maybe you've not been paying attention, but the field is getting quite mixed up in terms of the driver market for 25. A bunch of new rookies joining, Lewis is getting a late divorce and jumping ship to Ferrari. Meanwhile, Carlos is racing without a seat in the Scuderia. Mercedes is getting a facelift. McLaren, actually, they're pretty much the only ones that aren't getting touched by this. But Red Bull, while not having big changes in terms of drivers, a great fucking shame in my opinion. Let's see how many lost championships it will take for Paris to finally get the boot. I'm being too harsh on Paris again. Ew. Fine, he did outperform Max in Baku, I guess. Until he didn't. But Red Bull, I think, have faced the biggest change of all. Literally, the mastermind behind the monstrous bull that Max has been riding the past 3 years has now moved on to Lawrence's pet project. And I swear, if in 3 years Lance Stroll is contending for the championship, I will get a tattoo of him on my left butt cheek. The left one, because the right one is already occupied. I wasn't kidding when I said I'm a big fan of Lando's. Well, there you have it. We're absolutely in one of the greatest seasons of the century. It is probably all thanks to the Red Bull team f***ing the dog on this one, and Zach putting the right set of immature nut jobs in the car, and some more absolute chaos ensuing in the rest of the grid. But here it is, the best season of this century. And who could have thought Formula 1 could be fun again? I certainly didn't. I've actually got to go. Since Piastri won, he is of course now my favourite again. So, I have an appointment with a tattoo parlour. Wonder how difficult it will be to transform Lando's portrait into Piastri's. Need to get rid of the smile for sure. Or, maybe I get Piastri on my left one, and then the next time I'm stressing over a Grand Prix, the two of them will be hugging it out. Now that would make me the absolute McLaren fan, huh? Now where do I fit Zach?